Thank you so much for coming here today to listen to my paper. So my paper is called Silent Global and Oppressive Local, Fetishization of the Disabled War Veterans in Iran through the Ideological Construction of Living Martyr. For the past decade, I've been studying the living conditions of injured survivors of war, incarceration, and political turmoil in parts of the Middle East, such as Irani Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, and Syria Kurdistan, and Turkey Kurdistan. All 4 parts of Kurdistan, and other parts of Iran, of course, because that's where I'm from. This paper stems from the study of the living conditions of the Iranian veterans and civilians who became injured/disabled during the Iran-Iraq War, in the middle of which I was born. My methodology has been mostly archival research and digital studies of the disabled veterans' memoirs, eyewitness testimonies, and online comments that I post on the Iranian state-sponsored news agency's website as their only podium to express their discontent with utterly inadequate care they receive. And the reason I use that is because I'm not able to travel to Iran for security reasons. So this is like the only place that I've figured out that they actually post their comments and they complain a lot. And because it's just an online place, it's like not like easy to be monitored by the state, I suppose, because obviously they cannot publish a book complaining. But these little comments here and there has been their way of like expressing themselves. Other ways of expressing themselves has been setting themselves on fire, which I'm going to get through. Conducting the project and observing the everyday violence around the globe, I started wondering about the ways in which disability/injury of war survivors get fetishized. And I will get into what I mean by this, in both local and global contexts. Growing up in the post-war Iran, I witnessed how the nation state uses the disabled bodies to guarantee its survival by portraying them as an ideological construct called living martyr, as opposed to injured soldiers in need of care. On the other hand, I have observed that in the global context, the disability of disabled people, whether wounded veterans from Iran or other parts of the global south, get fetishized, meaning their injury is perceived as the natural state of affairs in those places. The fetishization of the disabled bodies from the global south takes place through the media and even the academies of the global north, when violent processes that render those bodies disabled get masked, justified, naturalized, mystified somehow. So I have, and I'm going to get into this like extensively defined this elsewhere, but, and I really don't want to take up a lot of time on this, but it's still being a little quickly go through it. So I have extensively defined, okay, I lost what I was gonna say, excuse me. Okay, before I do that, let me just read a paragraph by Homa Katuzian, the contemporary historian of Iran, the way she described the war in a few sentences. Large population, and I quote, large population displacements took place both in the war zone and elsewhere. Growing number of people temporarily leaving the main cities to escape the bombing, some of them coming back to see their house ruined and some of their dear ones dead, maimed, or shell-shocked. Nothing as horrific as this had been experienced by the country in recent centuries. It soon became a rose garden of martyrs, in name as well as fact, and the flowers of its youth destroyed by landmines and mustard gas. In Iran, millions of conscripted soldiers and volunteer militia, along with the Revolutionary Guards, participated in the war. But just like any other war, none of them came back intact. Hundreds of thousands were injured and or permanently disabled. Tens of thousands, including unarmed women and children, were exposed to chemical weapons and required long-term treatment. Iraqi forces deployed, and I quote from United Nations documents almost 1,800 tons of mustard gas, 140 tons of taboon, which is a nerve gas, and 600 tons of saurine, again, nerve gas. Of the approximately 1 million people exposed to mustard gas, 100,000 required medical care, and today 75,000 continue to be chronically ill, and unquote. The disabled veteran population in Iran is estimated to be, according to the most recent Human Rights Watch that actually came out this summer, is between 100,000 to 560,000, which could not be really accurate because a lot of people don't even register with the services that is supposed to provide care. The reason the exact number is not known can be traced back to the fact that many of the, that's what I explained, veterans never identified themselves to the Disabled Veterans and Martyrs Foundation. From now on, I'm going to call it a DVMF because it's too long, to receive benefits, or they might have died before getting a chance to be recognized by this foundation. Traditionally, almost everywhere in the world, disabled war veterans receive special treatment. Well, how adequate that is, of course, we question that, but still, they're special kind of disabled people because of their relationship to the nation state. It is special in a sense that the rest of the disabled population typically does not receive the same privileges that veterans do. Again, I know there is a lot to question there. According to the most recent Human Rights Watch report on the rights of disabled people in Iran, which came out 2018, like I said, as well as the disabled veterans' own words that I have been extensively researching, the current long-term care sponsored by the Iranian state for them and for civilians who were, again, injured, is inadequate and inefficient. I have like tons of documents to show that if you're interested. Okay. Okay, the first burning hoop that they have to jump through is about proving their disability. You have to prove that you're disabled. So the DVMF, the foundation, is the only authority that can determine the severity of the survivor's injury or disability. Thus, if disabled survivors want to make a claim that they have been exposed to chemical weapons or explosions and get their disability percentage, which is what then enables them to get minimum services, determined, they have to provide extensive documentation and have their health examined by the medical commission of the foundation. If they can prove that they have been exposed to explosions or chemical weapons, then the foundation will determine their percentage. The medical commission needs proof to determine the percentage. For example, they require proof from civilians that they have been to the polluted areas. By chemical weapons, we mean polluted areas. Confirmation from the government of the municipality and proof of medical examination. The foundation is a major player in Iran's construction and developmental industry projects, such as hotels and estates. This would suggest that they have sufficient funds to invest in major residential and commercial projects. Disabled veterans, however, are usually told that the foundation does not have enough money to meet their needs, and therefore they should just be content with what is given to them. The DVMF, which veterans simply call foundation or Bonyat in Farsi, in short form, is known for corruption and scandal. Even domestic newspapers controlled by the state's Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance have reported this corruption. So you know how terrible situation is that even the domestic, and this is close to the supreme leader, this foundation. So it's not that it is part of the reformists, so they can call it, it's really close to the right side, so it's really difficult to basically blame it for anything. The DVMF has a health deputy branch responsible for convening medical commissions and determining the disability percentage of disabled veterans. The percentage determined by the foundation plays a significant role in the veterans' lives. That determines everything you get, that number. This is because the percentage determines the quality of health care they receive, benefit levels, medications, as well as the amount of financial support for which they might qualify. Essentially, the number/percentage defines almost every aspect of their life. This is why even when introducing themselves, veterans mention their percentage, almost as if it's a part of their identity. For example, they call themselves a certain percentage veteran. I'm a 40% veteran. I'm a 20% veteran. That number is part of who they become. Historically, the assessment of veterans' needs has been done according solely to specifics directly related to their medical conditions. This is from WHO. Currently, attention is paid to what the veterans' needs are in a more holistic manner and to what can facilitate their rehabilitation process or improve their functioning process. The Iranian state requires that disabled veterans and civilians prove their disability in order to receive financial help, like we talked about, medication, treatment, everything. The first item on the long list of support and documents is proof that a particular recognizable explosion or attack caused their injury. Like a particular attack during like different things that they went through, different attacks that happened by the Iraqi army or offensive by them, which they call an accident memo, or in Farsi surat sanehe, or accident report, you can call it. Abbaspour, the head of the health deputy for the DVMF, stated in an interview that every veteran would carry their accident memo with them, should carry it with them. And imagine, this is like from 30 years ago, right? This is like between 1980 to 1988. You might think, why didn't they get it earlier? Sometimes it doesn't show itself until later in life. And mustard gas is something new. I mean, Iran's case is actually very fascinating for scientists because it is new and there were a lot of people who were affected. They're still, I mean, studying it. Yeah, so since this document, this report or memo contains important information regarding the expenditure unit, Revolutionary Guard, Army, police force, what force it was, all the way to the front line of combat. This document also contains the location and severity of the veteran's injury. According to the survivor's own words and the information presented at the DVMF's website, this document contains two key components, and I'm going through this because it's really important about their accessing care. The first is the record of a certain incident, shooting, explosion, bombing, whatever that happened, that resulted in injury or disability. The second is the record of treatment received. So you have to prove that I sought treatment, and here is what I received and where I received it. And we are talking about like combat field. Obtaining both of these parts can be a very difficult task for several reasons. First of all, the war happened before the advent of widespread computer use, meaning all record keeping was done in hard copy. According to the survivors, many of the explosions and bombardments led to the destruction of such papers. Therefore, it is not easy to find proof that a particular explosion happened at a certain time and place, 20 or more years ago. Secondly, combat fields, combat field hospitals, which kept a proof of treatment provided for injured veterans, were often themselves hit by bombs. So everything was lost. The same thing could also have happened to the paperwork or records stored in administrative offices on the battlefield. This has made it impossible for some veterans to prove what happened to them and to provide documentation of any treatment received. It was also sometimes the case that veterans who acquired an injury in battle did not seek immediate treatment and continued to fight to help their fellow soldiers. Now, after almost 4 decades, they cannot prove that they had to make a decision between surviving by receiving a timely intervention or letting others die. Furthermore, there are many cases of veterans only beginning to experience health problems due to something that happened to them during the war many years later. One veteran wrote in an online comment on a news website that when he sought help from the foundation, he was told that he was lying and that maybe he was recently hit by a car and that he was not a veteran at all. As such, veterans who do not possess the accident memo, that document, with full details face numerous obstacles in convincing the foundation of their injury. Another aspect of the living condition, which is really important, is counter-rehabilitation protocol that the state uses, meaning more disabled, higher percentage, more services. So you can never actually get better, because the worse you are, the more services you're supposed to receive, right? For example, if your percentage is under 25, you don't receive a lot of services, but then if you are more than 25, then you receive university quota for your children. Actually, that's not 25, that's 45 for university quota for your children entering university. You might get a car, but then your medication will not be paid for if it's under 25. There's this battle like always going on between this number, this percentage being really, really important. So the system pushes veterans to think that the worse they become, the higher percentage they receive and the better care they can get. Often the idea of rehabilitation after trauma is about helping the person feel better and getting them closer to their state before the trauma. Well, I shouldn't say that as a disability studies scholar, but that is the idea, at least in rehab. Whether or not I agree with it. Natural disaster, war, car accident, anything. However, the percentage system does the complete opposite, pushing veterans to never become rehabilitated or feel better. If they do, they risk losing the percentage they have already been given, which means losing already inadequate benefits. Additionally, reading the veterans' accounts, I have come to realize that the percentage system has been effective in disuniting the veterans and reducing them to percentages, categories who often envy each other's supposed disability benefits. Oh, that guy is 40, I'm 39, see, like that be more percentage. Therefore, instead of perceiving themselves as one community with similar needs who can get organized and fight for their rights, maybe, they have been pushed by the state's dividing policies to perceive each other as competing rivals. So I'm going to read one from an anonymous veteran's quote that he left on this website, and I quote, "I've been belittled and humiliated by the foundation so much that I cannot even begin to describe the things I've been told by the authorities. During the war, my best friend died in my arms. Today, I'm very traumatized. I keep bursting into tears. I've witnessed so many scenes that I can never talk about them to others who haven't been there. The foundation doesn't recognize me as a veteran, even though I went to them after 30 years when I really needed help." So he hadn't gone to the state for all these years because he thought it was fine, but then at some point he realized he has a need. Another chemically injured veteran, 15% disabled, said, and I quote, "I got shell-shocked trying to rescue my fellow soldier. On the same day, they took me to so-and-so combat field hospital, and after a while, I felt troubled mentally. I went under treatment for mental disability. I went to the Ilam province's Revolutionary Guards station. That's in Iranian Kurdistan, and they receive even worse treatments because it is in Kurdistan. That's another whole thing. Now they say we have no record for the Salimi hospital. When I go to the medical commission, they tell me that I have been injured in my lung. Since you don't have your mental disability incident memo, you don't get more than 3% disability percentage." And this person was eventually institutionalized. And when they're institutionalized, they're over-medicated. That's to sleep and not talk. And because when they talk, they say things against the state, and then the hospital would be responsible for anything they say, so that's why. I wonder how much time do I have? Do I have until 1?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, well, whatever's useful for you, but you know, we'd probably like to have some time.
Exactly, for questions. I just want to, cover as much as I can about this. Okay, I want to just go through a little bit more about their living conditions, and then I'm going to discuss the cultural nationalism project of Living Martyr and what that has served, like another use of the disability, fetishizing disability in order to serve a purpose. Unemployment and lack of accommodation for mental disability, of course, exists just like anywhere else in the world. that is the problem. Unfortunately, for disabled folks, that is a very common problem. And Iran is not an exception. Mentally disabled veterans, by that I mean those who have acquired a brain injury of one type or another due to the exposure to explosion blasts or shrapnel shells. Those who have to deal with post-traumatic stress or brain injury after often exhibit overstimulation, irritability, and self-harming behaviors. Unfortunately, there are also reports of domestic violence inflicted by some mentally disabled veterans against their spouses and children. Additionally, many of the veterans have housing problems due to unemployment and poverty. As soon as homeowners find out that a potential tenant is a veteran, they avoid renting their home out to them because they perceive them as crazy and agitated. Or they call them moji, which in Farsi means wave, like you have a brain problem. In most, meaning explosion wave, you've been exposed to that. In most of these cases, veterans' wives must bear the responsibility. Another gender aspect of this whole thing, I'm just like really touching on really briefly. Responsibility of breadwinning and caring for the family by working both inside and outside their homes. Employers are also known to fire war veterans when they find out about their mental disability. It would make a great difference if employers, instead of dismissing veterans, of course, remained considerate and accommodating of their disability. It goes without saying. In one case, the wife of a veteran could not care for her disabled husband and therefore needed the foundation to provide institutional care for the veteran, but the foundation refused to act. Their excuse was that, quote, the family has already received so many benefits, end quote. That was their answer to the woman. Almost always false. In this particular case, the veteran was disabled both physically and mentally, while the institution in Iran are either designed for physically disabled veterans or mentally disabled veterans separately, but not for those exhibiting both varieties of disability. So you can't be both. If you're both, then they don't know what to do with you. This particular veteran's wife, to protest the injustice she was facing, burned herself alive in front of the foundation in March 2017 when I was actually writing the dissertation. So it's like unbelievable. Like, I saw this on the news and I'm like, yeah, it's still happening. It's an ongoing problem. They set themselves on fire. Children commit suicide, a lot of suicide, among their families and also the veterans themselves. So there are high rates of suicide and morphine addiction among disabled veterans. The addiction to morphine should be quite foreseeable due to the enormous pain they tolerate with their injuries. A domestic news agency actually, on March 6, 2013, reported a case where and I quote, veteran who committed suicide was believed to have been mentally disabled. So now saying, oh, the reason you committed suicide is because you're disabled, not because you're receiving inadequate care. This report referred to a veteran who walked into the foundation building and injured a security guard with a metal bar. He then went to different departments of the foundation, broke the glass doors at the entrance, and verbally assaulted the staff. After the incident, the foundation simply cut his financial assistance, which caused many problems for the veteran and eventually led to his suicide. A research project conducted by the Department of Behavioral Sciences at Bariatullah Hospital studied the suicide cases in Tehran, suicide cases among veterans occurring between the years of 1981 and 2002. The subjects had killed themselves by several methods, such as, yeah, I guess I don't need to get into like different methods. It might be upsetting for folks. Taking medication, yeah. This study found that all the veterans who took their own lives were under 40 years of age. The study suggested that their suicide were related to factors such as marital status, their measured disability percentage, determined by the foundation, chemical weapons injuries, shell shock experience, trauma, hospitalization, psychiatric treatment, psychiatric medication, and undergoing surgery. In one study, scientists argued that the study of suicide in the Iranian population is extremely important. They suggest that some subpopulation are at higher risk of suicide than others. In the study, which was a retrospective one, 1,463 cases of death were selected, and the frequency of different methods of suicide, like hanging, blah, blah, was also determined. The study found that suicide is a notable cause of death among among disabled veterans. The head of the medical commission at the foundation stated that suicidal behavior in some veterans is a, and I quote, side effect of the medication they use to control/treat their mental disability. He claimed that every hospital in the country would serve the disabled veterans since they all hold this special insurance called golden insurance, which is not true. A lot of them don't even have it. He added that there are facilities in place to serve the veterans' family members who travel with them as well. Again, a lot of it not true. However, in practice, there are no accounts confirming the existence of those benefits. None of the veterans actually say, okay, that's correct. In every press conference that the foundation authorities hold, they claim they do everything they can to ensure the well-being of martyrs and veterans' families, but the material reality based on the veterans' accounts appears to be very different. It is worth mentioning that the foundation's budget is 1 trillion toman, which is over 308 billion US dollars per year. Okay. Okay, I guess I will just continue with this fetishization that I'm really interested in. Not just about Iranians, veterans' disability, but other veterans from other countries' disabilities and how that gets fetishized, and what I mean by that. So first, I'm going to get into the Iran's case of cultural nationalism, and then if we have time, I can elaborate more on what I mean by that. It has a political economy aspect to it, and that's the reason I use that word. It stems from commodity fetish, but I'll explain it later if you're interested. So, a fetishization of disability through cultural nationalism, or what they call the living martyr. Let's get into that. Hargu, inspired by Himani Banerjee, argues that during and after every war, states are left with the crucial job of narrating and remembering violence in such a way that the ideological legitimacy of a state and a now concluded war do not get questioned. The Iranian state has been selling an official public narrative of the war since it started, and disabled survivors are a major part of it. Hargu argues that the Iranian state has been involved in the project of cultural nationalism since the war started in order to legitimize the war and the state's necessary existence according to the Shia ideology. This project of cultural nationalism is anchored in the process of memorizing and remembering the war, using it as a powerful tool in legitimizing the theocratic regime's rule through its ideological cultural concepts, such as the notion of the living martyr, or in Farsi, jambaz. This word didn't even exist in Farsi vocabulary. It's interesting, like afterward they came up with it. It was in the region, actually Lebanon. Hezbollah had used it before. It's interesting, but not the Farsi phrase, obviously. This was new, jambaz. Yes, living martyr is a different thing, but jambaz means somebody who is like ready to sacrifice everything. It's the Farsi version, was totally new. It's a euphemism, basically, for a disabled veteran. In Farsi, jambaz, literally the one willing to sacrifice her life, is a disabled veteran who has come home after fighting for his faith. This word did not exist in the Persian vocabulary until the Iranian state strategically invented it in accordance to its ideologies of jihad and martyrdom, of course. After signing the ceasefire, the war did not end for either the state or the people who had fought it. After 28 years, probably more, when I wrote it, 28, the state still uses memorialization or commemoration of the war in creating a culture of imaginary struggle against an invisible enemy that is constantly there. Even You're mostly political scientists. You must have heard this supreme leader constantly saying enemy, enemy, enemy. Khatouzian argues that the Iranian state has strategically deployed the concept of resisting against forgetting the 8 years of sacred defense, what they call it, not the war, or imposed war, they call it. They never call it Iran-Iraq war. Imposed war, sacred defense, in order to sustain its dominance and control over the nation. Hargu argues that the Iranian state keeps the memory of the war alive, and I quote, as a mechanism for modeling of the past in the present moment. She reveals that the Iranian state's project of cultural nationalism is carried out through texts, memoirs, photography, museums, street art, memorial sites, cinema, theater, commemoration events, and etc. Oddly, to this long list of cultural production sites, I add both martyrs' cemeteries, which the Iranian state calls the Rose Garden of Martyrs, as well as the nursing home for disabled veterans. This seems like a bizarre addition, but if we think about why my school, in all the years I was a student, would take us for mandatory visits to these sites, we start to see the same project in effect here. Schools were not supposed to take us to nursing homes and cemeteries to make the veterans feel cared for and loved. I argue that this was also part of the cultural nationalism project to prepare the next generation for the same sacrifice and defense against internal and external enemies at the present and future. The main agenda is the regime's survival at any cost. I join Hargu in arguing that the Iranian state's survival, achieved partially through the project of cultural nationalism, occurs at the price of silencing a myriad of war stories. This concealing of truth and concrete evidence once again reminds us that we are dealing with an ideological regime. Banerjee argues that it is a mistake to think that cultural production sites, such as religion or language, can exist in isolation from power relations embedded in the social. In fact, considering them as independent categories that can function outside the relations of power is an ideological construct itself. Therefore, it is important to take a holistic approach when thinking about cultural production in relation with the material world mediated by social relations. Banerjee makes it clear that perceiving culture, theocracy, or religion as neutral and harmless ideas conceals the oppression and exploitation that could be happening within them as routine practices. Given the elaborate length the state goes to in its construction and maintenance of the memory of the war, it is ironic that it does not actually care about the real remnants of the war, meaning the disabled bodies of the wounded, both soldiers and veterans. What the state sees as a remnant is a memory, which they have been manipulating for the past 30 years. The Iranian state has assigned a special role to disabled veterans who have survived the war. The idea of living martyr, idea, not a person, right? Idea of living martyr is an assignment that the disabled veterans are supposed to fulfill. This construction has been propagated through popular culture, poems, films, museums, myriad of events. This construction works as a fetishization process, I argue, that makes the reality of disablement in wounded soldiers, masks the reality, not makes, masks the reality of disablement in the wounded soldiers. In fact, the state has managed to hide the inadequacy of care for the veterans' disabled bodies under the idea of living martyr, who is supposed to live and act I guess I don't have the rest here. Or maybe I do. Okay, I don't have it. Who are supposed to act as a living martyr, not a disabled person who needs support. So that assigns them a certain role to fulfill. For example, they act like an angel, like someone, like a saint, like a person who is like really good, really kind to everyone, is okay with whatever God gives him, even if it's inadequate care. So in this way, they like block the road for any blaming or complaining or saying I'm just a human being, you know. So they close all those doors by doing that. I think just to elaborate a little more, I guess I have a little bit time to elaborate on this concept of fetishization and what I mean by that. I guess I made it clear a little bit, but still maybe a little more. So I argue that this fetishization of disability happens in two ways. One, it happens by the state in the local context, like we went through, like all these, Living Martyr business that is in place. The other way is by silence. And the silence, I mean the silence of the whole global community, everyone, not saying anything about like this chemical weapons that were used on these people. And basically everyone walked with impunity. Including Saddam, right? He was never held responsible for that. Well, he was, but the only people who got to say anything was people of Halabja, right? And the only time we heard about Iraqi Kurdistan's case is when the President Bush administration was justifying the war in Iraq. They said, oh, he gassed his own people. Suddenly, this disablement of these people was mobilized as an ideology to come and serve a purpose, and then again, disappeared. Now nobody talks about what Iraqi Kurdistan people go through. Even it's difficult, even it's related to environment and agriculture because of the effects of those chemicals, the nerve gas. So basically what I'm trying to say is that the ways in which disability gets produced through unequal power relations is usually masked, even in the field of disability studies. And I argue that disability studies itself acts as a colonial power, as an imperialist power to mask those relations, but not letting these stories come out and never paying any attention to it. I think it is the source of it that is masked and mystified. So when we talk about the realities of disablement in so many parts of the world, everywhere in the world, but mostly where there is like environmental disasters, where there is war, where there is political instability that leads to, like, for example, incarceration, all that. These are sites that produce disablement. And I argue that the field, disability studies field, and other fields, of course, should start thinking about this, because usually now I'm going to be presenting actually a genocide Holocaust conference, and I was actually thinking about this because mostly what we talk about is annihilation or survival. What if I survive with disability? That the sources of my disability that was acquired through an unequal power relation, I argue, shouldn't be masked. It should be talked about. In disability studies, we are supposed to celebrate disability. We are supposed to have disability pride. We are supposed to say, oh my God, this is just fantastic. But the truth is, the ones who can say that are the upper middle class who have a choice to say that. Well, I have no choice when I'm getting bombed. In fact, I have no time to even think and theorize all that. So I guess I just leave it there. Thank you so much.